Boy, do we have a lot to talk about and even more to learn. I'm sneaking in before this episode to set the stage for the next two because, well, things went off the rails for us. We originally set out to discuss how presidents inherit economies from their predecessors. But the more we dug into that, the more we realized the real story was much bigger and much more concerning. So we pivoted. Over the next two episodes, we're diving into how the U.S. government borrows, why it's paying more in interest than ever before, and what that means for us as citizens. But even beyond that, we started to see a bigger picture, one where power isn't quite where we thought it was. We've woken up to the realization that we're far from the democratic republic our forefathers envisioned. Instead, a small group of ultra-wealthy individuals and corporations hold an outsized influence over our government, essentially an oligarchy. Some of what we'll share is speculation, inference, and opinion, but a lot of it is backed by hard data from the U.S. government, third-party researchers, and investigative journalists. Some of the numbers we reference may be slightly outdated, but trust us, the current stats wouldn't make things look any better. This conversation is complex, frustrating, and at times, downright depressing. But we're not here to fearmonger. We're here to learn. We're not experts, just people trying to make sense of it all. And if we get something wrong, please let us know. We're more than happy to be corrected, and honestly, there are a few things we hope we're wrong about. So buckle up. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Two Millennials and Mom, where we bring you engaging conversations and respectful disagreement across the social spectrum.
Injected with the quirks of everyday life.
Curl up as we navigate the complexities of this modern world with all the humor and warmth we can muster.
And the occasional gentle ribbing. We're glad you're here. Happy listening.
Howdy, howdy. Welcome to Two Millennials and Mom, where generational perspectives mixed with humor and warmth dive into topics like current events, quirky questions, and everyday life, all while enjoying the unique dynamics of our family trio. In this episode, we're breaking down how the U.S. government borrows money, who holds this debt, and the implications for the economy and everyday citizens. We'll also discuss the roles of the Federal Reserve, interest rates, and the interplay between government spending and revenue. What's going on, ladies? How are y'all this afternoon?
We're good. Hello.
Good.
I mean, I'm good right now, but talking about government debt doesn't make me super freaking pumped. Let me just say that.
Yeah, I definitely feel you on that one. Doing the research for this over the last few weeks has left me with headaches on more than one occasion.
Oh, I believe it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't really know how to go about this other than just diving right in. So I think
let's hit it, man.
What I'm going to start with here, I've got some visual aids for us today. The one I want to start off with here, this is a time progression of the national debt year by year. So it starts back in 1977 during Jimmy Carter's administration, and then it moves forward all the way to 2023. So we actually added about another $2 trillion on top of what we're seeing right now. So we're sitting about $33.5 trillion in national debt right now. And we can see that really from the end of Clinton's terms, starting with the Bush administration through Iraq and Afghanistan, it has just almost gone parabolic. It has skyrocketed in the last 20 years.
That big jump is COVID, right? That red jump.
This one, yeah, this is 2020, which would be COVID. And so real quick, I just want to break down, because it was really hard for me at first to kind of visualize or conceptualize a trillion. So I saw this kind of interesting mathematical breakdown that may make it a little bit easier to understand. So a trillion is a million millions.
Goodness.
Yeah, so
That's
a million has
millions.
Yeah, a million has 6 zeros behind it. A trillion has 12 zeros behind it. And just to kind of put that in different terms, if you spent $1,000 a day which, let's be honest, I know I can spend with the best of them, but $1,000 every day, if you were to spend $1,000 a day, it would take you 2,739,726 years and 10 days to spend $1 trillion at $1,000 a day.
1 trillion to spend 1 trillion.
1 trillion.
And
Last
our government,
year,
the United States government, is at how much?
well,
Very
they
fast.
spent $6.5 trillion last year. As of right now, the deficit is at almost 35 trillion.
It would take us 3 million years to spend $1,000 a day to get to 1/6 of what they spent last year.
Yes.
Golly. I feel like that is a little mind-blowing in and of itself. But also, I have a hard time comprehending how long is 3 million years? Like, I probably should have gone back and looked. Is that when were dinosaurs here? Like, I don't even know. However long ago, 3 million years is a long time. And so I did the math a little bit differently. And if you were to put that into perspective via, let's see, the population of Dallas, Texas, which is the 9th largest city in the United States. It has a population of about 1.3 million people. It's the third largest city in Texas. Every single person in Dallas, Texas, for the entirety of their life, from birth to death, at approximately 77 years old, that's our average lifespan in America right now, would have to spend $1,000 every single day. Every person in Dallas, every single day, from birth to 77 years, would have to spend $1,000 a day. But eventually that gets old. What do you spend money on anymore? Oh my gosh, that's a lot of money, y'all. That's a lot of money.
And that's just to spend what the United States has spent in excess of their revenue. That's the 35 trillion we're talking about.
Okay.
So
just the debt.
When we talk, just the debt. When we talk about how much is being spent, you're talking about astronomically different numbers, larger numbers there. So last year, and we're going to get into this a little bit more, but last year they only brought in $4.5 trillion in revenue and spent almost $6.5.
And so where are they borrowing that money from? I mean, who's going to lend anybody $2 trillion?
Well, that's kind of the silver lining on the storm cloud is it's us.
Just really quick, for the record, for anybody on YouTube who's watching, you can see all of these graphics that Cole is presenting for us. In the show notes, we will have all of the sources linked as well, so you can go back and look at them if you're not happening to be watching on YouTube.
Yeah. So what we've got here, this is kind of just a pie chart that is a breakdown of who owns U.S. government debt. And a little over 40% of it is individuals and institutions within the United States, like private institutions. So that would be individuals or like private corporations within the United States owns a little over 40% of the debt. Almost 20% is owned by the Federal Reserve, which is, we'll get into this a little bit more later, but the Fed is who controls monetary policy within the United States. They hold about 20%. So the government owes itself 20% of its total debt. In fact, it's actually probably a little bit more than that because there's other intragovernmental borrowing going on between agencies. But this is as of 2022, around 75% of all U.S. debt is across these 5 categories: U.S. individuals, the Federal Reserve, the Social Security Trust Fund, Military Retirement Trust Fund, and the Civil Service Retirement Fund. So those all total, I want to say, make up like right at 74%, I think. So the
quote unquote
the remaining,
locally.
Right, domestically.
Okay.
So the other 25% is global. Japan has a huge portion. China has a big chunk. but they're still both like right around that 4 to 5% range of total U.S. debt that they are technically owed because they're holding treasury securities, because that's primarily how the United States generates excess cash to spend, is by issuing those treasury securities. A treasury is basically an IOU from the government. If you're familiar with like a CD or a bond, it's kind of like that. So with a CD, the bank says, well, you're going to keep this deposit with us for a specific period of time. We're going to give you a little bit of extra interest because you're not touching that and you can't touch it, and there are penalties if you do. Treasuries are a little bit not quite as strict as like a CD would be, but essentially you get a sheet of paper. That's kind of how it used to be, is you would get this treasury bill, note, or bond, and they would say, okay, on this maturity date, we're going to give you $1,000. And up until that maturity date, once or twice a year, we're going to give you the interest of what we owe you on that $1,000 at this specific rate that was printed on the sheet.
And it's super secure, right? Ish.
Generally speaking, yes, the sentiment is that it's one of the most secure investments you could make because it is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. The United States government being arguably the most powerful economy in the world, one of the most stable economies in the world, at least historically speaking, it's generally considered to be a very safe investment.
So when you say that we own the debt, we individuals, institutions, the Federal Reserve, this is how they're borrowing that money from us, is through treasuries and bonds?
Right. They're essentially selling us an IOU that says we're going to pay you back later and we'll pay you interest until we pay you back. And we go and buy those from the U.S. government, and utilizing that cash, that's how they generate additional cash flow that they later can go spend on all of the stuff we're going to talk about here in a little bit. That is more than they bring in taxes, more than they generate in revenue.
Okay. And where do you get these bonds?
So, I mean, most people are probably getting them through their brokerage firm. You can get them on the primary market directly at auction. Maybe you can get a specific level of discount. We're going to give it to you at this price. And so there are some nuances between these treasury securities. Like bills are typically like a few weeks to, I think they can go up to 2 years. And the way you make money on a treasury bill is they say, okay, this is an IOU for $1,000. And we're only going to charge you $990 for this one. So you get that $10 over the course of however long, be it a couple of weeks to a couple of years, and then that extra $10 that they pay you back at the end, that $1,000, you make the difference. And so that's kind of how you would get the yield on a treasury bill. Then you've got notes, which are 2 to 10 years, and then you've got bonds, which are 10 to 30. There has been some speculation here recently that they may start doing those for an even longer period of time, maybe even go out to 50 years. But as far as I'm aware, the longest maturity that I've seen is a 30-year note. So kind of like a mortgage, they say, give us $1,000 up front, we'll pay you 2%, 4%, 5% every year on that $1,000. And then at the end of 30 years, you get your $1,000 back.
Quick question, and I'm going to kind of throw a wrench in, especially if you're talking about those term links being extended and longer. What happens if you die? Are they transferable?
Yeah.
Or does the IOU just get ripped up?
No, I mean, generally they would be transferable. You got to understand, the vast majority of these are not owned by individuals. They're owned by entities, if you will. It could be a bank, could be a corporation, it could be a trust, some sort of institution like those, hedge funds even. They're all, because it's such a secure investment and seen as one way to combat inflation, then it's a tool that is used. And I mean, really, this is the foundation for our entire economic and financial system. is these government treasury securities.
It is an interesting question, though, Callie, when you think about 30 years or 50 years, and if somebody dies or the company that bought those goes, I mean, that's a tangent that we need to think about, but it's an interesting question. How much of that goes unclaimed eventually?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and technically the government still owes that money, but as we can see on this chart here, when we're talking about who owns all of this debt, the Federal Reserve owns a significant portion of it. And that's kind of what I want to talk about too, because on those treasury securities, they have a coupon rate is what it's often referred to, which is essentially the annual percentage rate or annual percentage yield of what the government has to pay on all of those trillions of dollars of treasuries that have been issued over the last 30 years. So the Fed
and it varies by when you bought it, what the interest rate was, how long it is. So there's lots of variance there.
Yeah, there's a ton of variance because they're issuing them on a weekly basis.
Okay.
So one thing that I want to touch on here with the Fed owning about 20% of U.S. government debt, to me, that is really hard to conceptualize because that's almost saying, like me saying, yeah, my left hand borrowed $20 from my right hand.
Yeah.
And my left hand is paying my right hand interest. And you're just like, that one I kind of struggle with conceptually.
Yeah.
But where those interest rates, and they've fluctuated dramatically over time, where those come from, they're largely determined by the Fed. The Fed is a federal agency, sort of, that manages monetary policy for the United States. So a real quick breakdown here. Monetary policy is control of the money supply. So you can kind of think about that as they're attempting to throttle supply and demand of the dollar. So they can expand and contract the growth of the economy by utilizing some of the tools that we'll go over here in a minute. A lot of people hear another term, fiscal policy, and they kind of get confused about the two because they kind of sound like the same thing. The difference is monetary policy refers to the actual control of the buying power or the value of a dollar, almost the expansion of our currency, whereas fiscal policy is handled by Congress and oftentimes the president through the budget. That's where money is getting spent, who's spending it, and how. So that's kind of the difference between those two. Monetary policy determines how much money there is. Fiscal policy determines how much of it gets spent by the U.S. government.
Okay.
So,
I just wonder if whoever is running the Federal Reserve has just a little bit of a God complex. Look what I can do.
it kind of depends on who you ask. And historically speaking, I think there have probably been some guys who maybe shouldn't have had that job. And then there have been some guys who were really good at that job. They understood economics and supply and demand very well. And they have bailed us out of some situations, historically speaking. They've also kind of caused some situations, historically speaking.
Right. Like, I would think that you would have to have a pretty serious kind of ego, good or bad, right or wrong. You would have to have a pretty serious ego to say, no, I can go and take control of all of this and do good, do whatever. And that's the best choice. Kind of.
But it's really not in the hands of one person, right? It's in the hands of a board.
Yeah. So the Federal Reserve is kind of broken down into a couple of parts here. The Federal Reserve overall is controlled by the Board of Governors. There are 7 board governors who serve 14-year terms, kind of like secretaries or heads of departments. They get nominated by the president, and then they get confirmed by Congress. So they serve 14-year terms. There's 7 of them, but they are staggered. So it's kind of like the Supreme Court and kind of not like the Supreme Court. where essentially a new one is coming in every 2 years. Their seat is vacated, and the president now gets to nominate someone else for that spot. Then Congress will come in and confirm that.
So conceptually, it's nonpartisan or less partisan because it's not this president with his money guy running everything as long as they can.
Yeah, that's the goal. Sort of like with a little bit less lax than appointments to the Supreme Court, because those are for life. So these are a little bit more structured. But yeah, conceptually, that is the goal, is to try and prevent extreme political bias from that controlling body.
Okay.
Gotcha.
So let's dive a little bit deeper. I don't want to get too into the weeds here on monetary policy, but just so that we kind of understand a little bit more about how our system operates, the Fed controls monetary policy. They have a couple of tools to do it. They're kind of one of their slower impact tools that's going to have a more of a lagging effect is going to be the control of interest rates. So you'll hear people talk about the Fed funds rate all of the time, but there are a couple of different rates that the Fed controls. One of the lesser known ones would be the interest on reserve balance, which is basically like if I have a savings account, whoever I bank with sets the rate that, okay, in my savings account, I'm going to get 0.2% or 0.5% on my money invested, because the bank takes my cash that I store with them and they go make investments and they lend it out to other people who are then paying them a higher rate. That's how banks make money. So the interest on reserve balance, or IORB, essentially controls the amount of interest that the Federal Reserve banks are paying to other banks to keep a balance within the Federal Reserve. So if that rate is higher, then that kind of decentivizes banks from lending out money. It's kind of one way that they can constrict the economy to slow down growth. It incentivizes banks to lend less. And obviously the inverse of that would be true. If they reduce those rates, then banks would be more incentivized to go and lend out that money so that they can make more money. Problem is when they lend out money, they're taking on a little bit more risk. So it's a little bit of give and take in those situations. You also have the discount rate, which is a little bit different. The discount rate is the rate of interest on funds that is charged to banks when they borrow from the Fed, because banks borrow from other banks all of the time. One of the things that the Federal Reserve does is, and here's a really important clarification to kind of make here, is that the Fed is almost broken into two pieces. You have the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, which controls the Federal Reserve banks, but then you have the 12 regional actual Federal Reserve banks, and those are actually structured and run like private corporations, but they're controlled by a federal agency. And so going back over to the discount rate, that is the interest that the Federal Reserve charges to those banks, because they're kind of like the last resort for if a bank needs to borrow, they can go to the Federal Reserve and borrow from them. The discount rate controls how much interest those banks are being charged. So a higher discount rate, when they're being charged more interest, means that they're less likely to borrow from the bank. A lower means that they're more likely to borrow from the bank. They have easier access to money, and then they can go lend it out and charge a higher rate than that to generate if they're unable to borrow from another bank, or if those other banks are charging them a higher rate.
Cole, this sounds so much like who's on first and what's on second. I mean, because you've got the Federal Reserve, and then you've got the regional bank, and then you've got the bank you may do business with, which isn't either one of those other banks.
But kind of answers to them and kind of doesn't, and uses them and leverages them, but doesn't.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. The Federal Reserve as a whole is also responsible for policing all of those policies and determining and dictating the kind of behaviors that those banks are and aren't allowed to exhibit.
Meaning my bank.
Right.
Okay.
Right. The Federal Reserve. One last thing here on interest rates. I promise we'll be done with interest for at least a couple of minutes.
Oh, yay!
But so the Fed funds rate is the one that you typically hear about the most. And because the Fed operates as kind of the bank of last resort when it comes to other banks borrowing, the federal funds rate sets the range that banks are able to charge each other for lending cash overnight. That federal funds rate is what kind of sets the bar for all of the other interest rates within our economy, because if the bank has to borrow from another bank to lend you money, they're going to charge you more than what they're getting charged so that they can turn a profit. Now,
that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, the primary tool that the Federal Reserve uses to control monetary policy is one that is a little, there's some contention here as to whether this is a good idea or not. But they refer to it as open market operations. Most people have probably heard about it in the news, referred to as quantitative easing is kind of one part of this, which is where the Federal Reserve, they can go out into the open market and they can either sell or buy a bunch of different securities. So that could be government securities, that could be corporate bonds. They can go and buy up all of this debt so that other people owe them money. But when they do that, they are essentially injecting cash into the economy and taking those securities off the board. So the supply of dollars has been elevated, and that can have a couple of side effects. If the supply of dollars at the time is really low, then that can be beneficial for kind of stimulating some growth in an economy by making dollars a little bit less rare, less scarce, where we're talking about the kind of the basic rules of supply and demand. But that is also kind of what inflation is it's the devaluing of a dollar. Really, inflation is the increase of the price of goods over time, but a big reason for that could be the devaluing of a particular currency. And so you'll hear people talk all the time about, the Fed can just print more money. And that is sort of true, but in modern terms, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. The Fed does technically control how much money gets printed every year, because one of their responsibilities is to make sure that the currency that's in circulation is clean and legible and legitimate and real. They don't actually do the printing themselves. The Department of the Treasury does, but the Federal Reserve is the one who orders those bills to be printed. They say we need X amount for the year 2025. Then the Department of the Treasury goes over to the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, who then will print that order for the Federal Reserve, and then the Federal Reserve gets it and they can distribute it in several different ways.
And the Federal Reserve operates outside of, they don't have to have congressional approval to print, to add more money to they're operating on their own.
Independently.
Right.
That's the word I was looking for.
Operating as an independent agency. I mean, technically, they would answer to the president on a certain level or report to the president, but they also are operating as an independent agency that is also run like a private corporation.
But also some of that printing of money, they're like part of the Fed's job and role in all of this is to keep the money that's in circulation, the physical dollars, cents, change, all of these things in good shape. Hey, this dollar is torn, or this one, it needs to be replaced, or this one is too old and doesn't have whatever it is. So they may be pulling some of that out of circulation and injecting new, fresh cash, literally because it is old and dilapidated and it needs to be replaced. Right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So just as a little tangent here, I read an article that Elon is wanting to take pennies out because it costs more to make a penny than a penny is worth. And so would he have to send that through the Federal Reserve to get those pennies deleted?
The Federal Reserve would more than likely be the ones responsible for collecting the pennies. I think that would need an act of Congress to determine.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's not an Elon idea. That's an idea that's been floating around for a long time.
Well, this article said it was his idea.
He likes to take credit for things, though. So,
But in modern terms, when you hear somebody who is talking about the Fed printing money, in reality, what they're talking about is quantitative easing, where they're going and they're buying up a bunch of securities, they're flooding the market with cash. We saw this happen during COVID, where in, I think it was 2020 or 2021, like 56% of all U.S. treasuries that were issued were purchased by the Fed. So they bought like half of the debt that America took on that year, which is probably not a bad thing, because I'll show you a chart here in a little bit. The United States in 2020 spent almost twice as much as it made. Yeah.
so
I'd
you
be
said
quiet.
a minute ago, yeah. You said a minute ago the fact that domestically we hold most of that debt is the silver lining. Why is that?
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a silver lining to me.
Because they owe it to us and not to China. Like, would you
Ah.
rather owe your angry neighbor who doesn't like you, or would you rather owe your sister?
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's kind of why it's the silver lining on the storm cloud, is because we as a nation, the public owns a
bulk of
tremendous
that.
portion of that debt, significantly more than the rest of the world, which is limited to right around 25-30% at the moment.
Okay.
Meaning that those other governments have less clout because of that debt, because we own more of it.
Right. So let's take a look here. This is from 2024. This was government revenue compared to government spending.
I'm scared.
I know, me too.
So this is kind of a breakdown of where all of that revenue came from and displaying a little bit of that shortfall. And then on the right side in pink here, we've got where all of that money went. 1.3 trillion to defense, almost 700 billion to economic studies, 1.5 trillion to Social Security, 874 billion to Medicare, almost $1 trillion in obligations. We're going to get really, really deep in the weeds trying to break these up.
Yeah.
They also sent over $1 trillion to states, but they spent
So that's
138% of their revenue.
that transfer to state could be emergency management, could be Medicaid,
Right.
government
Medicaid
programs that
would
are
be in
supported by
there.
the state, but are
Federal
somewhat
programs,
funded
yeah,
in some way by the federal
or
government.
federally funded, right?
Right.
You said they spent how much more than they made?
Almost 40%. They spent 6.2,
I'm sorry.
6.5 trillion. They brought in right around 4.5 trillion.
Can you imagine spending 40% more than you bring in?
No.
How do you get ahead of that? No. And again, we've talked about it on this podcast before. Like, this country does a horrible job of educating people on financial literacy. Maybe it's because they don't freaking know.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is
And
terrifying.
our entire economy is built on a foundation of debt. Like I was talking about earlier, our entire market structure is, the foundation of it is government securities, is the U.S. government being in debt. On top of that is the corporate debt system, corporate bonds. And then on top of the bond market, the stock market abroad rests on top of that. That's just kind of how it is structured, because many of those corporations wouldn't have enough cash flow to become publicly traded without securitizing their debt first so that they could get to where they are now.
Okay.
I hope
Does
there's some good news at the end of this.
So you said in this year, which I think you said was 2023, but that we spent more than 40% of our revenue and what we brought in. Does it happen? Like, is that the case every year?
I'm glad you asked. So let's come over here. This is a long-term chart that shows, you'll see this, this pink line here represents government spending. This dark line here represents government revenue. So starting in 1980, there has been a little bitty chunk of years here where the government has spent less than it brought in revenue. So yeah, it's kind of normal for us at this point, which generally speaking, when you're talking about in the corporate world or in an economic system, particularly one like ours, that's foundation is debt, debt is often required to grow. The goal is eventually in the long run to utilize that debt as an investment to generate more income than what you owe. That's how you become profitable, essentially, is to start making more than you're spending.
This is why I'm not a millionaire, though, because that seems so risky to me.
Oh, yeah.
That, and I'm just not that pro to risk.
Yeah. And so I want to back up here a little bit because, Mom, you and I were talking about this earlier, and you had asked, like, is that normal? Is it just
like
the
our
United
other countries
States that
do
is
this?
Yeah,
like
does
that?
every
Do
country
other
do this?
countries
Is this
And
just us?
the answer is yes, but we do it a little bit more. So this
Of course
chart
we
that
do. We're Americas.
yeah. This chart that we've got here, this is gross debt as a percent of GDP for advanced economies. The U.S. is sitting at number 5. We're slightly below the G7 average, but Japan, being part of the G7, is an outlier at their current national debt is 2.5 times their GDP. Ours is only 1.25 of our GDP. So, well, yeah, we're not as bad as Japan or Greece or Singapore or Italy. We're number 5 when it comes to debt to GDP. Now,
Jeez.
I want to show another visual here because just to kind of come to grips with the ratios that we're talking about here. On the left, this is the G20 GDP chart. This is essentially the 20 largest economies in the world. And it's trying to essentially show them by size. We've got the G7 up here on the top of this chart. We've got the BRICS countries on the bottom here in red. And then everyone else is this little chunk of the pie that's purple on the left-hand side. So the U.S. economy is the second largest in the world, right behind China, but we're actually a pretty good clip behind China. This is, I believe, as of 2024, and we're at 29 trillion in GDP. So this is essentially showing that we make up about 20%, 1/5 of the entire world economy.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Our share of global debt is over 1/3.
Again, I don't think we're very good at financial literacy, guys.
Yeah, this chart over here on the right side is kind of a heat map showing, it's a little bit of a combination of the last slide that I showed you, where we've got a heat map as to our percentage of debt to GDP, but it's also trying to give us a size comparison to the amount of debt that we as a nation owe. Now, again, we're the second largest economy in the world, right behind China, but China is only holding 16% of global debt that they owe to the rest of the world. And their economy is 30% bigger than ours, basically.
Oh, wow.
Now, Japan has a big chunk, but they also are a little bitty tiny island. So that's why they're this bright yellow. The leader in the world right now is war-torn Sudan. They're at like almost 350%. But their economy is so small that, I mean, it barely even registers on this heat map over here on the right.
But also with the corruption and everything, like their economy is
not a developed nation like the United States or China.
Not a developed nation, but absolutely at war for a really long time with each other.
In the dumps.
Yeah.
Not a great situation.
All of these numbers that we're talking about are so big that they're hard to conceptualize for me. So I found some other charts that I want to show you that we can break down here. I've got 6 charts here that take 6 different years over since 1990, and they break it down to U.S. government revenue generated and spending per person, per capita, if you will. And so it basically breaks it down how much the government spent each year per United States citizen and how much revenue they brought in per each person. So starting back in 1990, and Callie, you asked, is this normal? Do we do this every year? Yeah. But the problem is, if we go back, we see back in the early 80s, it stayed pretty tight here. We had a little bit of surplus in 2000 and 2001. Then right here is going to be right around Iraq and Afghanistan, where our spending increased and our revenue dipped down, but it stayed pretty tight
We
here.
picked it back up.
Till about the end of George Bush's terms, probably around Obama coming into office. And these two start to diverge pretty significantly. And when we talk about from 1990 to 2023, I mean, in 1990, we spent 121% of revenue. They brought in less than 10,000 per person and spent almost 12.
Okay.
I think that these charts specifically are so helpful in seeing kind of the not only the priorities of each administration, but how similar they really are. They vary a little here and there, but across the board, I mean, that's a big swath of data and information from 1990 to 2023. You've got several different administrations that have come and gone in that time period. And like you said, yeah, we kind of do the same thing every year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like
It
you're
ebbs and
seeing
flows,
a
but-
big variance of something.
Right.
Yeah. Clinton's last years in office were kind of our variance here, where that was the last time we reportedly had a surplus, where they only spent 88% of their income. They've made almost 13,000 per person and only spent a little over 11,000 per person. And the vast majority of that spending comes from Social Security. Whereas back in 1990, which would have been what, HW?
Yes.
Senior?
Yes.
So their largest spend was national defense, which kind of makes sense. That would have been right around Gulf War times, Desert
Yeah.
Storm. And so kind of moving along here, we'll jump 10 years into the future. In 2010, when Obama was in office, that year, we spent 160% of the revenue generated. So that means 60% of the spending that year, the United States government had to go and borrow to make that money so that they could spend it.
Okay.
Massive spending on national defense, closely followed by Social Security, then transfers to states. We see net interest on the debt way, way down here. It's the very bottom of the list. Not that big of a deal. Less than 1/15 of spending that year.
But also, I think that it's important to note here that Social Security is having to pay out the largest generation in history with baby boomers, and they're coming into that time where that Social Security money has to be paid due to those people. They've paid into it all of their lives. Now they're starting to retire. This really is the front side of seeing the financial impacts of the baby boomer generation come to fruition.
I was thinking that too, Kelly.
Yeah, and you can really see that epitomized in 2019, where Social Security overtakes national defense and veteran spending.
Yeah.
But
that said, I mean, didn't we do some research here the other day for another episode how millennials and I think it's Gen Z are even bigger, even larger populations. And so if we're still going to continue to rely on Social Security being a viable means of retirement and helping people as they age, those population bases just continue to grow. I mean, I guess that means your pool of people who are putting it in is also growing, but
yeah,
but is that going to be enough to keep up with one of the problems that we're kind of talking about here with monetary policy and inflation? Like, is that going to be enough? That's kind of the problem that we're seeing, is that the Social Security payments are going out, but what's getting put into it isn't, because it's essentially taxed as a portion of your wages. So if
Right.
your wages aren't going up, what's being put into Social Security isn't increasing, at least on a per
Oh,
person
that's a really
basis.
good point.
But
Yeah, the pot's not growing.
if it's
Yeah.
costing those seniors more and more and more to sustain themselves, something's got to give there. But I mean, that's a great example. Now we get to the next year, 2020, in COVID, and like I mentioned earlier, we spent almost 2 times the amount the United States
we
brought in
made.
revenue. Almost 2 times. They spent almost $25,000 per person, and they only brought in 12. Then, coming to our most recent example here, 2023, this is where we start to see this net interest on debt
Balloon.
balloon. It's starting, I mean, it's now comparable with stuff like Medicare. They're spending more on interest to debt than assistance to individuals. So they're spending more on the interest than food stamps, grants, all that kind
We're
of stuff, that kind of
spending
assistance to
more money
individuals.
to service our loans and service our spending habits than we are on the people who we're supposed to be indebted to, who we're supposed to be taking care of. And golly.
Yeah, this is not a great scale, not a great way to take an average here, but I did do an average on these 6 years. Across these 6 particular years, even with Clinton's 2000 at below 100%, the average on these 6 snapshots is almost 140% of spending, 40% more than what we're making in revenue.
And just to say, to be somewhat comfortable as an individual, well, you want to at least be putting aside 10%. So let's say you're living on 90% of your income and you're putting 10% away. We're not even doing that. We don't have a surplus to put away.
No.
And
there's no
we're paying
rainy day
interest
fund for the United States.
No. And we're living on 140% instead of even 90.
Yeah. So we're going to come back to this slide for a minute, because I think it's going to be a really good lead in to where I really want to take this, why I'm setting this stage, why I'm droning on and on about interest rates and the Federal Reserve.
It's not
and
just for
government
joy,
spending.
huh?
It's not just because I'm delighted and so excited about all of this. There is a point behind it. I want to take a moment to talk about federal spending and what we're spending it on, because we've all been hearing everything on the news here lately with Elon Musk and Doge, this Department of Governmental Efficiency, and they're talking about, oh, we're finding all of this government waste, all of this government bloat, the stuff we're spending these things on. I want to drive home something here real quick. I think that is a really big deal, and in the long run, beneficial. I was having this conversation with Callie yesterday. I also think it's really important that we manage who is doing this cutting. And I'm not sure if the richest man in the world is the person that we want in charge of that. I think there needs to be a little bit more oversight by committee personally, but I want to take one step back here and get to this point, because to me, when I crunched these numbers, it was staggering. So let's back up one page here real quick. On this breakdown of spending for 2023, when we talk about the net interest on debt, the United States, 10% of its spending in 2023 was to service the debt. 15% of its revenue, 1/6 of its revenue, went to servicing debt. That is absolutely astonishing to me. So I went and Googled, because Mom, you had asked previously, well, is that normal? What is the average American spending to service their debt?
Yeah.
It's 3 to 5% of their income. So the United States is spending 3 to 5 times to service their debt what the average American is.
Yeah, please.
So I really want to hear y'all's opinions on this about
No, you probably
government
don't.
spending. I mean, I alluded to it here a little bit, but talk to me, Callie, on Doge. I know you're not a fan of Elon.
I am not. I'm not. But at the same time, I'm not a fan of any one person being the decision maker in this capacity. I don't want to be that person who says, "Hey, this isn't important to me, so screw all of you guys.
Yeah,
Out of here." I just don't think that that's a reasonable way to do this. And Cole, you had mentioned kind of doing it by committee, and I get that the bloat that comes with being a committee and the red tape that comes with all of that, too many cooks in the kitchen. I totally understand that. But I do think that we have to find a better solution for servicing the kitchen, servicing the restaurant, having enough hands that are doing all of the work to share that load without it being one person, without it being one person's opinions. And I don't know if you guys, we're so stinking smart and technology savvy and aware. There has to be some other way that we can leverage artificial intelligence to say, hey, what makes the most sense? What actually is getting used and is benefiting all of these people and is benefiting our government, is benefiting our society, and what isn't? Like, you can't tell me that somebody can't write an algorithm that can come in and say, hey, I know that you think that this is important, or it may look important on the outside, but let's look at the kind of nuts and bolts of it. And then you can sit down as a committee of a couple of people. And I do think that you need to do that from a nonpartisan, bipartisan, however you want to talk about it, position that says, hey, this is what's important to me and my constituents and my party or whatever it is. This is what's important for the majority of people, even if it doesn't serve me. And
I'm just thinking about all of those deals that you saw on social media at the first of the year saying, you need to go to Chat GPT and say, hey, these are my goals and this is what, and how do I need to get there? What if our government used Chat GPT to figure out how to cut wasteful spending?
I mean, you cannot sit here and tell me that you can't better plan a budget than, I mean, it feels like a really bad, nasty game of tug of war at this point. I'm going to keep this because I want it, not for any other reason.
To me, it feels like we're just throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. And it doesn't matter about merit. It doesn't matter about expertise. It doesn't matter who gets hurt in the process of all of this. But hey, we're going to
scratch my back and I'll scratch yours.
Yeah, we're going to save some money here, or
it doesn't matter how much it cost us down the road. We're going to save it now.
Yes. And I'm not sure we're accomplishing anything.
That's why I'm so torn on this particular subject, is because while Callie, I agree with you, I think it's really scary to have a singular individual determining what gets to stay and what gets to go. But I also see that we've gotten to where we are right now by developing all of this via committee.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. What we're doing isn't working. What we're doing is not benefiting any of this country at all. And that's why I kind of lean into the AI portion of it. Like, how can we leverage the tools that are at our disposal to make them work for us? And sitting here and continuing to throw money at all of these problems isn't the best idea. In my personal opinion, continuing to just cut everything willy-nilly, especially at the hands of one man, one woman, one person, whoever you want to put it in, isn't a productive measure either. And so I think that we've got to find a better solution, because you're right. What we're doing right now isn't working. I mean, I also think that we need to demand better from the people who are talking. You know, there was a story that just came out this past week about the Biden administration was planning on sending $50 million worth of condoms to Hamas. Number one, that isn't true. Oh, yes, not the case. But Donald Trump has said it out of his mouth. It is on video recorded that he has said this. And then the White House press secretary repeated it. And then Donald Trump came out and said it again and doubled the number. So it's not $50 million worth of condoms for Hamas. It's $100 million worth of condoms to Hamas. That all of these other sources, including like Hamas themselves, including all of those governments over there, that have come out and said, this is not the case. This is not true. Have come out and refuted all of this with evidence. Nobody from the American government is helping us with our family planning initiatives. This is not the case. And so, but then you've got people who were coming and screaming that from the pulpit of the White House, saying this is what's happening and this is what we just fixed. And I feel like, again, there's some kind of hero complex in there that is, well, I fixed this. I stopped this. I took care of us. And I don't think that you can sit there and say that when it isn't true.
Well,
and
you can.
I think that we have to.
Should
You're
you?
right. You
no.
can. I don't think
But
that
you can.
should. And I think that we need to demand better from people who are talking. And you guys, I think that demand should come down on us. If we're sitting here talking about these things and we're wrong and we say things that are not true, raise the flag. I want to know. I don't want to be wrong. And, you know, Cole, you said here, and I think it was our very first episode, I can argue all day long to get my point across. I love doing this, but I never want to argue from a position of ignorance, from just straight up being wrong. And you said it much prettier, and I apologize for paraphrasing you poorly.
I don't want to keep being wrong out of stubbornness.
Yes.
That's what it was.
Yes. And I think that we need to take and apply accountability across the board, from the White House, from media companies, from conglomerates who are sharing those things, from independent TikTok news sources to you guys like us, and podcasts who, in the grand scheme of things, are small potato seeds. Do potatoes grow from seeds? I don't even know. I mean, all the way down across the entire spectrum. We have to be honest with reality. And you can have an opinion that varies and is different than mine. Totally cool. But we need to be able to differentiate between fact and opinion. And we're not doing a good job at that anywhere right now, in my opinion.
I would agree. So just real quick before we move on, talking about that transparency in media, if you will, I have seen wildly different sides of the stuff that is being said about USAID this week. And
Yes.
so I'm kind of hoping somebody may be able to fill us in, because doing all of my research on interest rates and the Fed and government debt, I didn't quite have the time that I wanted to commit to something like that, to go in and see. I did a little bit of looking, and some of it was just so, it sounded so absolutely ridiculous that I was like, okay, I need to put this away. So chime in, tell us what you guys are hearing. But I've heard everything from USAID being this super critical need for the U.S. to send aid to foreign countries, to the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's basically just a slush fund for Democrats. And I mean, why can't we get some truth?
Yeah.
Why can't we get some transparency about this? Maybe
Well,
USAID is a good thing. Maybe we can help the rest of the world. Do I personally think that maybe we should help ourselves a little bit first? Probably, but I also think that there are definitely people who, I know for a fact there are people who are less fortunate than me, because I am incredibly blessed. But I also know that there are people both inside and outside our country who aren't as fortunate as I am. And so I feel like we've kind of got to weigh that. But chime in, tell us what you've heard about everything going on with USAID. Maybe at some point we can try and compile that and put it together and talk a little bit more about government bloat and government waste. I think that would be a extremely eye-opening but also kind of horrifying episode.
Terrifying, yeah.
So much better than this one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I want to jump back to this real quick, because talking about all of the things that we've talked about today, we've talked about government bloat and government waste. We've talked about a deficit, which is spending more money than you're making. One of the things that I want to talk about that Callie and I think we're both similarly passionate on is taxes, and not necessarily the taxes that you and I are paying, but taxes that large corporations are paying. So let me get this slide up here one more time. And guys, I need you to buckle up for a couple of minutes because I'm about to throw a lot of numbers at you.
Really fast, for the record, I am totally and completely fine paying my taxes. I think that is part of my contribution to our society. I think that that benefits me. I think that that benefits other people. And I wish, do I want to pay them? No. Do I see the value and the benefit in paying my taxes? Abso-freaking-lutely, I do.
I'm going to clarify on that. It is not paying the taxes, but I only want to pay my share of the taxes. I don't want to pay everybody else's taxes too. I just want to pay a fair share.
I want to pay my fair share
across the board.
And I want my tax dollars to go to things that are important and impactful to me and the people around me.
Yes. And I know that's really hard to define what those would be because everybody has a different opinion. But yes.
I don't want to build bridges to nowhere.
Yeah. And like you said a minute ago, Cole, at the end of the day, I think that we have some focus that we need to spend on America, on making the lives of Americans from sea to shining sea better, easier, less hard. And if that takes tax dollars, which I think is what they should be used for in the first place, if that takes tax dollars to accomplish those things, let's do it. Sign me up. Yeah. That's part of being an American.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. But segueing here, because this is going to start to set the stage for next week's episode, which is really why I've covered all of this, because we're talking about oligarchies. I know it doesn't sound like it. I promise I'm going to get there, guys. But on this particular chart, you're going to see highlighted this $530 billion. This is corporate income taxes. So basically the taxes that corporations paid on their profits, because corporations don't have to pay taxes if they didn't make a profit. So I did the numbers. Right now, the corporate tax rate is at 21%. 530 billion is 20% of 2.5 trillion. So our next one here, this is from Statista.com. I went and did some research on Statista. They are apparently very highly regarded as being non-biased and highly credible. So This is corporate profits in the United States in 2023 by industry. I went and added all of these up. Now, for practical purposes, I did not include the $117.5 billion from the Federal Reserve banks, because by and large, that affects this number by 0.12, excuse me. So basically, this would drop to 3.23 instead of 3.35. We're talking about a basically not touching $1 trillion here. So added up for 2023, U.S. corporations had profits of 3.35 trillion. Well,
if they paid 21% of taxes on their quote unquote profits, because that's how it works.
Right. They would have paid about an additional 170 billion, which right around 700 billion total, which seems like just a drop in the bucket. Well, here's the thing. We need to back up another step here, because in 2017, the Trump tax cuts reduced from what was at the time the corporate tax rate of 35% down to 21%. So just to reiterate here, the corporations didn't pay 21% of 3.35 trillion. They paid 21% of 2.5 trillion, almost $1 trillion that they didn't pay taxes on in profits. Well, So going back to these 2017 tax cuts, corporations got a 40% haircut on their taxes. They dropped, like we said, from 35 to 21%. So I went back and I did the math. If they were at their previous tax rate of 35% and they actually paid it on this 3.5 trillion, their tax dollars that they would have paid was almost double at 1.17 trillion, which would have been a massive boon to not reducing our deficit even further.
Right. I was going to say, when you're sitting here trying to pay off your debt and trying to take care of all of these things, every single dollar counts. And when you're talking about trillions of dollars, millions of millions of dollars, all of that adds up. And so not only are they not paying what they're supposed to be paying at whatever tax rate they're at, the tax rate has been brought down. So they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and we're rewarding them for it as a government.
Yeah. Here's the kicker that really it's going to piss some people off. Some people are going to make excuses for it. But those tax cuts from 2017, they reduced our tax rate as well. They reduced individuals' tax rates. However, this year, those tax cuts expire for us. They don't expire for the corporations.
Lovely.
So our burden is going to go up. We're going to pay more, and corporations don't have to. And I think that's a problem.
Corporations who are taking home millions and millions and millions of dollars. And Mom, like you said at the beginning of this portion of everything, I have no problem paying taxes, but I want to pay my fair share. When the heck are corporations going to start paying their fair share? Even just what is mandated by the tax code.
And Callie, it's interesting that you mentioned that there was a study that was run from 2008 to 2015, whose finding was that the corporate tax rate on paper should be increased. So they took this study over that 8-year span. They looked at essentially U.S. corporations. They narrowed it down to 258 corporations that were consecutively profitable in all 8 years. If they had 1 year in that time frame that wasn't at a profit, it completely eliminated them from the study, and they were not observed in regards to what we're about to talk about. So as a group, the 258 corporations paid an effective federal tax rate of 21.2% over the 8-year period. Again, remember, this is before 2017. At the time, their effective tax rate was 35%. 258 corporations paid 21.2% of their taxes, just barely above half. 18 of the corporations, including General Electric, International Paper, Priceline.com, and PG&E, paid no federal income tax at all over the 8-year period.
Although they were profitable.
Although they were profitable, they had to have been reported profits each year in order for them to be part of this study. A fifth of the corporations, 48 in total, paid an effective tax rate of less than 10% over that period.
Let me draw this.
Deal? I want to get that deal. When I get my tax bill at in April, whatever it is, can I pay only 60% of it and get away with it?
Of those corporations in the example here, with significant offshore profits, more than half of them paid higher corporate tax rates to foreign governments where they operate than they paid in the United States on their U.S. profits.
What?
And we're not competitive. It's just absolutely mind-boggling when you start talking about this. I mean, I don't have the entire study. We'll post a link to it in the show notes, but their finding at the time was essentially that corporate taxes need to be increased so that maybe they'll pay a portion of what they're supposed to so that they can actually start paying their fair share. And we went the other way.
Well, and I think that we need to kind of take into consideration all of the loopholes that can only be taken advantage of by corporations. So to define that really, really briefly, the legal ways around paying your taxes. What?
Yeah. Talking about
I
financial
just-
education in our country, Callie, I think you're really spot on, is that for the layman, there isn't any. I mean, not
There
only
isn't
do we
any.
not have the education to know how to take advantage of those loopholes, we may not even have the resources to take advantage of those loopholes.
And of all of the people to qualify for loopholes, to qualify for a coupon to get your taxes at a lesser rate, why the hell would we give those coupons to corporations who are raking in money hand over fist?
The entire job, their sole purpose at this point is to turn a profit. Me personally, I think that the intent of capitalism at the start was not to create entities whose sole purpose is to generate profit, but it was to generate profit through innovation. Their sole purpose should be to innovate, and that is where they receive the benefit, is for innovation. And certainly, a lot of corporations are innovative. Don't get me wrong, not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But they are only innovative to the point that it generates a profit for them, not for the sake of being innovative.
For
is
the
my
benefit of
concern.
society.
Right. Anyone else's head spinning yet? No kidding.
Mine is.
So, like I said, I know I've thrown a ton of numbers at you. We've spent this episode unpacking how government debt works, how the U.S. borrows money, who it borrows from, and how we're paying more in interest than ever before. So instead of tossing out a new weird thought this week, we're going to let things marinate for a little bit, and we're going to leave you with this. There's an even bigger question lurking behind all of this government debt talk. We've alluded to it a little bit, but who actually benefits from this system? Because here's the thing. When any government is drowning in debt, they become more and more reliant on those who have the money to lend them. And in the case of America, those lenders aren't always everyday Americans like you and me. I don't own any treasury securities. They're major financial institutions. They're corporations and ultra-wealthy individuals. And when you control the purse strings, you control the power. We're not living in the democratic republic that our forefathers envisioned. Instead, we're operating in a system where a small, wealthy elite, banks, billionaires, and corporate giants hold a disproportionate influence over policy, election, and even the laws that shape our daily lives. We've all seen the mention of Elon buying the 2024 election. So in the next episode, we're going to dig into that reality. How did we get here? Who's really in charge? And what does it mean for the rest of us? We encourage you to buckle up. Like I said, I know I just threw a ton of numbers with you, but hang in there with me for one more week because we think this next conversation is going to be really eye-opening. I don't know about y'all, but for today, I need to take a step back and take a break from all of this. Mom, I'm hoping you've got something that can make us laugh a little bit.
I got
Please.
some good news story for you from Good Clean Funny Laughs, gcfl.net this week. They did stupid and funny laws, since we've been kind of talking about our government. And all of these are real. I can't tell you when they were passed, but they're supposedly still on the book. So here you go. You guys ready?
Yep.
Hey.
Ready.
In California, it is illegal to set a mouse trap without a hunting license.
I love
And-
that.
And
Sounds
women
like California.
women may not drive in a house coat. Do y'all know what a house coat is? It's
It's
your
like a
robe.
robe, right?
It's a robe. In New
Okay.
Jersey, you cannot pump your own gas. All gas stations are full service only. That one's still true in New Jersey.
Yes, I did know that. I've got a bunch of neighbors from New Jersey, and when they all moved to Texas, they were like, "Okay, this is really weird. We've never done this before," because they are adamant about it there.
Yeah.
This is a law that is real.
So when I was growing up, Texaco was the big station, and it was, the man who wears the Texaco star, because you pulled up in your car and he came out and he checked your tire pressure and washed your windshield and gassed you up and checked your oil, the whole thing. And then we went to
Great way to
self-serve.
generate jobs.
I was going to say, I feel like they're on to something. We need to expand that law in other places.
I don't know. Do you want gas to
So-
get even more expensive?
My
I mean,
mom
no.
had to learn how to pump her own gas at a point in time. Okay. Also
I
in
mean,
New
me
Jersey, also in New Jersey and Ocean City, it's against the law to slurp your soup at a restaurant. No slurping. In New York, it's against the law to throw a ball at someone's head for fun.
That sounds reasonable to me.
Can you throw
Here,
it like with malicious intent? Like, ka-chow.
I guess that's fine. There's a penalty for jumping off a building. The penalty for jumping off a building is death in New York. In Ohio, women are prohibited from wearing patent leather shoes in public. I don't
Okay,
get
so what's
that
a
one.
patent leather shoe?
It's a
Fake
shiny leather shoe that all little girls used to wear patent leather shoes. It was a big deal to get a patent leather, like a Mary Jane. So I don't know why it's illegal.
Classier than we are.
I love this one. It's illegal to get a fish drunk.
Okay, I want to know how that came to be. You know what? We need
Yeah.
to enact a law that says nobody can do that anymore.
How much beer do you have to pour into a lake to get the fish drunk?
Or even a fish bowl, like a fish bowl of vodka, which I know. Oh my God, is that where that came from?
I don't know. In Kansas,
Oh my gosh.
pedestrians crossing the highways at night must wear taillights.
I feel like that's a little junk in your trunk.
Yeah, how do you wear taillights as a pedestrian?
Ding, ding, ding.
And no one may catch fish with his bare hands. So there's none of that noodling in Oklahoma,
Noodle
in Kansas. Nope, you cannot noodle in Kansas.
That
Speaking
sounds
of
like somebody got mad. Somebody
Yeah.
got mad. Well, he could catch a fish with his bare hands and I can't, so outlaw it. Oh,
for our
gosh.
friends in Oklahoma, violators can be arrested and or jailed for making ugly faces at a dog.
Amen.
Yeah,
I love
mean,
that.
That's the best thing I've ever heard come out of Oklahoma. That should be a constitutional amendment.
Okay, here's a good one. State law in Oklahoma prohibits anyone taking a bite out of another's hamburger.
Oh. What if you have permission? Hey, can I have a bite of that? Sure. Absolutely not.
Don't know. In
Bummer.
Alabama, it's illegal to wear a fake mustache that causes laughter in church.
You can wear it at the grocery store. That's cool.
Yes. And I hate to tell y'all this one. In Alabama, boogers may not be flicked into the wind.
So some state legislature in Alabama was driving down the highway one day and just caught a big old nose gold
Loogie.
right in the head.
A nose gold. Oh my God.
In Wisconsin, in Racine, it's illegal to wake a fireman when he is asleep.
I mean, I'm cool with that.
I don't know how that
I
works.
mean, does that
though.
apply to arsonists? Like, don't start fires at night. They're sleeping. Don't bother them.
I mean,
But
isn't
I
that's
mean-
already illegal, right?
I don't know. I mean, so does that
Okay,
mean
Wisconsin
if the alarm
is
goes
the
off?
drinkingest state.
True.
True.
Remember, I literally saw a video the other day of the top 50 counties in the entire country. Wisconsin has all of them except for like 10. I don't think it's even that many. Yeah.
I thought it was 9. In Wisconsin, butter substitutes are not allowed to be served in state prison.
I bet that
I
one's
did
economic.
find out about this.
Oh, you
It
did?
has to do with them being a dairy state,
Yeah.
and lobbyists have put this in place to make sure that the money stays there to their local product.
So
I don't know how that
maybe
keeps it from
lobbyists
being
can
served.
be- Well, no, butter substitutes. So Wisconsin
Yeah.
being a dairy
Oh.
state generates real butter. So they
Right.
can't spend any state resources
Oh, that
on
makes sense.
fake butter.
Yeah.
They have to keep it as actual butter.
That law
Yep.
makes sense. We're going to have to do a little bit of research on this. We'll have to do another episode on these crazy
Yeah,
laws
we'll
and
have
why
to do a
they're, because
follow-up
that would
on
make
that.
sense. Okay.
Can you
2
make
more.
sure that flicking boogers
Flicking
into the
biggers.
wind? I don't even know,
Oh.
man. Can you make sure that flicking boogers into the wind is on there? Because I gotta know.
Yeah,
Okay,
we
I'll-
need the backstory on that one for sure.
Okay. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
2 more. Virginia, it's illegal to sell peanut brittle on Sunday.
Well, because sugar's of the devil.
But
I have no
peanut
idea. I
brittle
don't actually
isn't.
know.
Peanut brittle's damn good.
Yeah,
And
but that's sugar with peanuts in it.
this is another one of my favorites. Flipping a coin in a restaurant to see who pays for coffee is outlawed.
Again, one of these where like you can't even imagine
Can't fathom.
where that would come from.
Yeah.
I
Were
want
the
to know.
lines
What
just
if you're
getting too long? Was it a tradition and they said, no, it takes too long to get coffee. Just buy your own damn coffee.
I just want to know, can you flip the coin before you go in? Like, hey, we're going to go in here and we're going to have coffee. Let's flip it now so we know. And then you can go in and pay for their coffee. How does that even work?
It's just
I don't know,
but can you
prevent
imagine-
coin flippage in restaurants.
Unacceptable. I just, can you imagine a police officer? You just flip the coin. You're paying for your friend's coffee out of the goodness of your heart, and a police officer in Virginia comes up to you and is like, hands behind your back, please. What?
I don't know. We'll do a little bit more research and we'd love to hear your funny, crazy laws.
Yeah, if you've got any other
Yes.
crazy laws, send them to us. We need a good laugh after this week.
We did. But
Amen.
some of those were dang funny.
Yeah, but again, we always need more laughs. Send the laughs. Send the laughs.
Send the laughs. Love you guys.
Love you too. We'll
Love
see you
y'all.
next week.
Bye.